On April 16th, 1994, a man driving alone near Mount St. Helens saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. A 9-foot-tall creature with glowing red eyes and massive bat wings descended from the sky, landed directly in front of his truck, and stared at him with what he could only describe as pure malevolence. This wasn't Bigfoot. This wasn't a bear. This was something far more terrifying. And it's still out there. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, we dive deep into the world's most mysterious creatures, unexplained phenomena, and legends that refuse to die. Today, we're investigating one of America's most disturbing cryptids, a creature that combines the nightmare fuel of giant bats with the raw power of something that should not exist. I'm talking about Batsquatch, the 9-foot winged beast that terrorizes the volcanic regions of Washington state. By the end of this video, you'll know the full story behind this creature, the terrifying eyewitness accounts that sent investigators scrambling, the connection between Batsquatch and one of America's deadliest natural disasters, and why some researchers believe this thing is still hunting in the shadow of Mount St. Helens. But here's what really keeps me up at night. The sightings never stopped. They just got more disturbing. So stick around, because what you're about to hear will change how you think about what's really living in the wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. Let me take you back to May 18th, 1980. Mount St. Helens, a volcano in Washington state that had been dormant for over a century, suddenly erupted with a force of 24 megatons of thermal energy. That's equivalent to 1,600 Hiroshima atomic bombs. The explosion was so massive it could be heard in British Columbia, Montana, and California. 57 people lost their lives that day. The eruption column rose 80,000 feet into the atmosphere. Entire forests were flattened in seconds. An avalanche of debris traveled at speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour, obliterating everything in its path. But something else happened that day. Something the official reports never mentioned. Something that would remain hidden in the shadows for over a decade. In the weeks and months following the eruption, rangers, hikers, and locals began reporting strange occurrences in the blast zone. Massive wing prints pressed into volcanic ash. Deep guttural screeches echoing through the devastated forests at night. Livestock found dead with massive claw marks and drained of blood. Campers who swore they saw enormous shadows gliding overhead when the moon was full. At first, authorities dismissed these reports as post-traumatic stress, the psychological aftermath of witnessing one of the most catastrophic natural disasters in American history. People see what they want to see when they're scared, right? Wrong. Because by 1994, the reports weren't just whispers anymore. They were screams. And one encounter would finally force the world to pay attention to what was really lurking in the shadow of that volcano. Brian Canfield was an 18-year-old construction worker driving home from a late shift on April 16th, 1994. The route he took every night passed through a remote stretch of forest road near Mount St. Helens. It was after midnight. The roads were empty. The only sound was his truck engine and the occasional crackle of his radio, trying to pick up a signal through the mountains. That's when his headlights caught something standing in the middle of the road. At first, Brian thought it was a bear, but as he slowed down, his blood turned to ice. This thing was standing upright on 2 legs, towering at least 9 feet tall. Its body was covered in bluish-purple fur that seemed to shimmer in the headlights. But what froze Brian in absolute terror were the wings. Massive, leathery bat wings that stretched at least 15 feet from tip to tip, folded against its back like a cape from hell itself. The creature turned its head toward the truck. Its eyes glowed bright red, not reflecting the headlights, but emanating their own hellish light from within. Its face was a grotesque fusion of a bat and something almost human. A flat nose with flaring nostrils, pointed ears that twitched at every sound, and a mouth that revealed rows of sharp, yellowed teeth when it opened slightly, as if tasting the air. Brian sat frozen behind the wheel, his foot hovering over the brake, every instinct screaming at him to run. The creature took one step toward the truck, then another. Its movements were deliberate, predatory. It knew Brian was trapped. It knew he was prey. Then, Without warning, the creature spread its wings. The sound was like thunder, a deep whooshing boom that shook the truck. In one powerful leap, it launched itself into the air, wings beating with such force that Brian's truck rocked on its suspension. The creature circled overhead once, twice, those red eyes locked onto him the entire time. Then it let out a screech so loud, so piercing, that Brian's ears rang for 3 days afterward. And then it vanished into the darkness, flying toward the volcanic peaks of Mount St. Helens. Brian didn't sleep that night, or the next. When he finally worked up the courage to report what he saw, he was met with skepticism, ridicule, and dismissal. But he wasn't crazy. He knew what he saw, and more importantly, he wasn't alone. Once Brian's story went public, something remarkable happened. People started coming forward, and not just one or two. Dozens of witnesses across Washington state began sharing their own encounters with what locals were now calling Batsquatch. A mother and daughter camping near Swift Creek Reservoir in 1997 reported being awakened in the middle of the night by a massive shadow passing over their tent. When they looked outside, they saw a creature matching Brian's description perched on a tree branch, its wings wrapped around itself like a cloak, watching them with glowing eyes. They packed up and left immediately, abandoning half their camping gear in their panic. In 1999, a group of hikers on the Ape Canyon Trail, which ironically got its name from a different cryptid encounter decades earlier, heard what they described as the most unholy sound they'd ever experienced. A combination of a bat's screech and a bear's roar that seemed to come from directly above them. When they looked up, they saw a massive winged shape silhouetted against the moon, circling their position. They ran back to their cars and didn't stop until they reached civilization. A park ranger named Marcus Webb, who worked in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest surrounding Mount St. Helens, began documenting strange findings in his patrol logs starting in 2001. Massive three-toed footprints measuring 18 inches long pressed deep in a mud near volcanic vents. Claw marks gouged into tree trunks at heights exceeding 12 feet. And most disturbing of all, the remains of deer, elk, and even a black bear, all found with puncture wounds consistent with massive fangs and drained almost completely of blood. Webb kept his findings quiet for years, afraid of ridicule. But when he finally spoke to cryptozoologist Peter Byrne in 2008, he admitted what he'd known all along. Something unnatural was living in those mountains. Something that hunted at night. Something that seemed drawn to areas of volcanic activity. And here's where the story takes an even darker turn. Because Batsquatch wasn't just appearing randomly. There was a pattern. A disturbing pattern that researchers couldn't ignore. Every major Batsquatch sighting has occurred within a 10-mile radius of volcanic activity. Mount St. Helens, Mount Rainier, Mount Adams, all active or dormant volcanoes in the Cascade Range. And the sightings intensify during periods of increased seismic activity. In October 2004, Mount St. Helens erupted again, not as catastrophically as 1980, but enough to send ash plumes and lava flows down its slopes. In the 3 months following that eruption, there were 17 documented Batsquatch sightings, the highest concentration ever recorded. Witnesses reported seeing multiple creatures circling the volcanic peaks, their red eyes visible for miles in the darkness. Dr. Helena Kovacs, a cryptozoologist who spent 15 years investigating Batsquatch, believes the creature isn't just attracted to volcanic regions. It may have originated from them. Her theory, controversial as it is, suggests that the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens didn't just devastate the surface. It may have opened something deep underground, a cavern system, a sealed environment that had been isolated for thousands, maybe millions of years. And when that seal broke, something emerged. Something that had evolved in complete darkness, surrounded by volcanic heat and sulfurous gases. Something that had developed massive wings to navigate underground cavern systems. Something with eyes adapted to see in absolute darkness, which would explain why they glow red when exposed to surface light. And something that had developed a taste for warm blood because there was nothing else to eat in those deep, dark places beneath the earth. It sounds like science fiction, right? But here's the thing. In 2007, cave explorers discovered a previously unknown lava tube system beneath Mount St. Helens, extending miles underground with chambers large enough to hold commercial aircraft. The temperature inside these caves remains constant at 90 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, heated by residual volcanic activity. And most disturbing of all, they found bones. Lots of bones. Deer, elk, mountain goats, even bare bones, scattered throughout the deepest chambers, many showing signs of having been cracked open to extract marrow. Something was living down there. Something was feeding down there. And when that volcano erupted, it didn't destroy these creatures. It released them. I want you to hear directly from people who've encountered this creature, because their descriptions are chillingly consistent. Sarah Mitchell, a wildlife photographer, was attempting to capture images of the elk migration near Mount Adams in September 2011 when she had her encounter. I'm going to read directly from a written statement. I was positioned on a ridge overlooking a valley, waiting for the elk herd to pass through. It was dusk, that twilight hour where the light plays tricks on your eyes. I heard it before I saw it. A sound like leather cracking, rhythmic and powerful. Then I saw the shadow. It passed between me and the setting sun. And I'm telling you, this thing blocked out the sky. I looked up and saw it clear as day. 9 feet tall at least, maybe bigger. Covered in dark bluish fur that looked almost iridescent in the fading light. The wings were the most terrifying part. They weren't like bird wings. They were like bat wings, with long finger bones and stretched membrane. When it passed overhead, I could see the blood vessels running through the wing membrane. It was close enough that I could have hit it with a rock. And its face, God's face. It looked almost human in structure, but completely wrong. Like someone took a human skull and reshaped it into something predatory. The eyes are what got me. They glowed red, but not like a reflection. Like there was fire inside its skull. It looked right at me, and I swear it knew I was there. It knew I was watching. Then it shrieked, and the sound went through me like electricity. I dropped my camera and ran. I didn't stop running until I reached my car 2 miles away. Sarah never went back to that ridge. She sold her camera equipment and moved to Seattle. When asked why she came forward with her story, she said, "Because people need to know what's out there. People need to know they're not safe." Then there's Daniel Ortega, a volcanic researcher who was collecting gas samples near a fumarole on Mount St. Helens in March 2015. His account adds another layer to the mystery. I was working alone, which in retrospect was stupid, but I'd done it dozens of times before. I was about 100 yards from my base camp when I felt it. This overwhelming sense of being watched. The temperature dropped suddenly, which was weird because I was next to an active volcanic vent. I turned around and saw it perched on a boulder, maybe 30 feet away. It was enormous, at least 9 feet tall, hunched over like it was ready to pounce. The fur was bluish-gray, matted and thick. But what struck me most were the wings. They were partially spread, and I could see they were damaged. One wing had what looked like old scars, burn marks maybe, running along the membrane. It was breathing heavily, and I could see its ribs expanding and contracting. We stared at each other for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then it made this noise. Not a screech, but a low, rumbling growl that I felt in my chest. It spread its wings fully. And I'm telling you, they had to span at least 20 feet. Then it jumped and flew away, but the way it flew, it was struggling, like it was injured or exhausted. I reported it to my supervisor, but he told me to keep it quiet. Bad for tourism, he said. These aren't drunk people telling stories at a bar. These are credible witnesses. Profesionals. People who had nothing to gain and everything to lose by coming forward. And their stories match. Every single detail matches. Now here's where this story takes its darkest turn. Because Batsquatch isn't just flying around scaring campers. There's evidence it's hunting. And not just animals. In July 2009, a hiker named Thomas Reed went missing in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. His car was found at a trailhead. His backpack was found 3 miles up the trail. But Thomas was never found. Search and rescue teams combed the area for 2 weeks. Nothing. No body. No additional clues. Just gone. What they did find, however, was disturbing. 20 feet from where his backpack was discovered, Searchers found massive claw marks gouged into a tree trunk at a height of 14 feet. Below those marks, the ground was covered in what can only be described as a struggle. Dirt torn up, broken branches, and small patches of blood that DNA testing confirmed belonged to Thomas Reed. But here's what they didn't tell the public. They also found tufts of bluish-gray fur snagged on nearby branches, fur that didn't match any known animal in the region. The samples were sent to a lab, and the results came back inconclusive. The lab technician noted that the cellular structure of the fur was unlike anything in our database, showing characteristics of both mammalian and something else we cannot identify. Thomas Reed's case was officially closed as lost hiker, presumed dead due to exposure or animal attack. But the rangers who worked that search and rescue operation, they know the truth. One ranger, who requested to remain anonymous, told a local reporter years later, "We all saw the wing prints in the soft earth near his backpack. We all saw the drag marks leading toward the cliffs. We all knew what took him. We just couldn't say it out loud." Then in 2012, a young couple camping illegally in a restricted zone near Mount St. Helens radioed for emergency help at 2 in the morning. The dispatcher could barely understand them through their panic, but the words "giant bat" and "trying to get in our tent" came through clearly. By the time rangers reached their location 3 hours later, the campsite was destroyed. The tent was shredded. Their food supplies were scattered, but the couple was gone, vanished. Unlike Thomas Reed, this couple was found 2 days later, 7 miles from their campsite, wandering in a state of severe shock. They were dehydrated, covered in scratches, and couldn't form coherent sentences for almost a week. When they finally recovered enough to speak, their story was terrifying. They said the creature circled their tent for over an hour, making guttural sounds and scraping at the fabric with its claws. When it finally tore through the tent, they ran. They ran through the darkness with no light, no supplies, no sense of direction, because the alternative was facing that thing. They said it followed them, flying overhead, landing periodically to block their path, almost like it was hurting them, playing with them. They only escaped when they stumbled into a stream and followed it downhill until they found a ranger station at dawn. The official report listed their injuries as consistent with running through dense forest in darkness and possible encounter with local wildlife. But the scratches on their backs? 3 parallel lines, spaced too far apart to be from any known animal in the region. And the burns on their skin? Unexplained. So what exactly is Batsquatch? Where did it come from? And why does it haunt the volcanic regions of the Pacific Northwest? There are several competing theories, and honestly, each one is more disturbing than the last. Theory 1. Batsquatch is a surviving prehistoric species. Some researchers believe it could be a descendant of giant bats that existed during the Pleistocene epoch. We know that megafauna once roamed North America. Giant ground sloths, sabertotevcats, wolves. Why not giant bats? The theory suggests these creatures survived by retreating into deep volcanic cave systems when the Ice Age ended, evolving in isolation for tens of thousands of years. When Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980, it exposed these caves, and the creatures emerged blinded and confused into the modern world. Theory 2. Batsquatch is a genetic mutation caused by volcanic radiation or chemicals. This theory proposes that normal bats living near volcanic vents were exposed to unusual compounds or radiation from deep within the Earth, causing rapid and extreme mutations. While this sounds far-fetched, we do know that volcanic emissions contain dozens of rare elements and compounds. Could prolonged exposure cause genetic changes? It's technically possible, though the timeline for such dramatic changes would typically require generations, not years. Theory 3, and this is where things get really weird. Batsquatch is an interdimensional being. Some paranormal researchers believe the volcanic activity doesn't just release physical creatures, but actually tears holes in the fabric of reality, allowing beings from other dimensions to cross over into ours. They point to the fact that Batsquatch sightings spike during volcanic activity and that the creatures seem to appear and disappear without leaving traditional tracks or evidence. They argue that Batsquatch isn't from our world at all, but from somewhere else, somewhere worse, and the volcanoes are doorways. And then there's Theory 4, the one that Dr. Helena Kovacs supports. Batsquatch is exactly what it appears to be, an unknown species of giant bat that has always lived in the deep volcanic cave systems of the Pacific Northwest. It's nocturnal, it's rare, and it's perfectly adapted to an environment humans rarely explore. The 1980 eruption didn't create it or mutate it or summon it from another dimension. The eruption simply forced it out of its natural habitat, into contact with humans for the first time in recorded history. Whatever the truth is, one thing is certain. Batsquatch is real. Too many credible witnesses. Too much physical evidence. Too many unexplained disappearances. Something is out there in those mountains. Something that flies in the darkness. Something that hunts. Something that should not exist, but does. You might be thinking this is all ancient history, stories from decades ago. But here's the thing that should terrify you. The sightings never stopped. They're happening right now, more frequently than ever. In September 2019, a group of hikers captured footage on their cell phone of something massive flying over Mount Rainier. The video, which has been analyzed by multiple experts, shows a large winged creature silhouetted against the mountain. It's distant and grainy, but you can clearly see the bat-like wing structure and the size. One analyst estimated based on reference points in the video that the wingspan was between 18 and 22 feet. The hikers who filmed it insist it wasn't a bird. The movement was wrong, too slow, too deliberate, and the wings beat in a pattern inconsistent with any known bird of prey. In December 2021, a drone photographer lost contact with his equipment while filming Mount St. Helens at sunset. When he finally recovered the drone 3 days later, the final minutes of footage showed something attacking it mid-air. A massive shape with glowing eyes swooped in from off-camera, and the last frame before the camera went dead was a close-up of bluish fur and a gaping mouth full of teeth. The photographer tried to report to authorities but was dismissed. He posted the footage online, where it went viral, garnering over 3 million views before it was mysteriously taken down due to a terms of service violation. And just this year, in March 2024, 3 separate witnesses in different locations around Mount Adams all reported seeing a large winged creature on the same night. One witness was a pilot flying a small aircraft who said the creature passed within 100 feet of his plane, close enough that he could see its red eyes clearly. He filed a near-miss report with the FAA, but it was classified as unidentified wildlife, and no investigation was launched. The activity is increasing. Whatever Batsquatch is, it's becoming bolder. It's venturing closer to populated areas. And researchers are terrified of what that might mean. Here's what keeps researchers up at night. Mount St. Helens is still an active volcano. So is Mount Rainier. So is Mount Adams. Geologists monitor these mountains constantly, and they all agree it's not a matter of if these volcanoes will erupt again, but when. When the next major eruption happens, and it will happen, what else might emerge from those deep underground systems? If the 1980 eruption released Batsquatch into our world, what other creatures might be down there, waiting in the darkness? What else has been living beneath our feet for millennia, isolated and evolving into forms we can't imagine? Dr. Kovacs has been warning anyone who will listen. We need to take this seriously, she said in a 2022 interview. We need to organize proper expeditions into these cave systems while we still can. We need to understand what we're dealing with before the next eruption forces more of these creatures to the surface. Because right now, we're seeing maybe a handful of Batsquatch. But if there's a breeding population down there, if there are hundreds or thousands of these things living in interconnected volcanic caves stretching for hundreds of miles beneath the Cascades, the next eruption could release them all. And then we won't be dealing with occasional sightings and missing hikers. We'll be dealing with an ecological catastrophe unlike anything in human history. Her warnings have been ignored. No major expeditions have been funded. No government agencies have taken official interest. The National Park Service continues to classify Batsquatch as local folklore and unsubstantiated myth. But the people who live in the shadow of those mountains, they know better. They've seen the evidence. They've heard the screams in the night. They've found the claw marks and the drained livestock and the mysterious disappearances that never quite add up. They know that something is out there. Something ancient. Something powerful. Something evil. Despite the official dismissal, independent researchers haven't given up. There are currently 3 active Batsquatch investigation teams operating in Washington state, conducting regular expeditions, collecting evidence, and interviewing witnesses. The most prominent is the Cascade Cryptid Research Group, led by former park ranger James Holland. They've installed motion-activated cameras and audio recording equipment at strategic locations around Mount St. Helens, Mount Rainier, and Mount Adams. Over the past 5 years, they've captured hundreds of hours of footage. Most of it shows normal wildlife: bears, deer, elk, mountain lions. But there are anomalies. Footage showing massive shadows passing overhead, visible only for a frame or two. Audio recordings of screeches that don't match any cataloged animal sounds. And most compelling, thermal imaging that has captured large heat signatures circling volcanic peaks at night, moving at speeds and altitudes inconsistent with birds. In 2023, the team captured what they believe is the clearest evidence yet. Thermal footage from a camera positioned near Ape Canyon shows a large bipedal creature with extended appendages resembling wings, walking along a ridge at 3 in the morning. The creature stops, appears to survey the area, then launches itself off the cliff face and flies away. The thermal signature measures approximately 9 feet tall, and the wingspan measures over 20 feet tip to tip. The footage has been submitted to multiple wildlife experts, and the consensus is troubling. It's not a known animal. The locomotion is wrong for a bear. The size is too large for any bird species. And the wing structure is unlike anything in the current biological record. James Holland stated in a recent podcast interview, "We're not crazy conspiracy theorists. We're scientists using scientific methods to investigate an unknown phenomenon. And the data is telling us something is out there. Something real. Something that demands serious scientific attention. The question isn't whether Batsquatch exists. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" So there you have it. The complete story of Batsquatch, from its emergence during the Mount St. Helens eruption to the ongoing sightings that continue to this day. A 9-foot-tall creature with massive bat wings, glowing red eyes, and a demeanor that witnesses universally describe as malevolent, living in the volcanic regions of Washington state, hunting in the darkness, and remaining officially unproven. But here's what I want you to take away from this. Absence of proof is not proof of absence. Just because something hasn't been captured alive or found dead doesn't mean it doesn't exist. The ocean covers 70% of our planet, and we've explored less than 5% of it. The Earth's crust is riddled with caves and cavern systems we've never seen. And the volcanic regions of the Pacific Northwest contain miles and miles of unexplored underground territory. There's a reason ancient cultures around the world have legends of winged creatures living in mountains and caves. There's a reason every civilization has stories of things that hunt in the darkness. Maybe those stories aren't just folklore. Maybe they're warnings. Memories of encounters passed down through generations. Knowledge that something shares this world with us. Something that doesn't want to be found. If you ever find yourself hiking in the Cascade Range, if you ever camp near Mount St. Helens or Mount Rainier or Mount Adams, pay attention to your surroundings. Listen for sounds that don't belong. Watch the sky at dusk and dawn. And if you see something massive circling overhead, something with wings that span 20 feet and eyes that glow red in the darkness, don't try to get closer. Don't try to film it. Run. Get to safety. And consider yourself lucky that you lived to tell the tale. Because Batsquatch is out there. Whether science acknowledges it or not. Whether the government investigates it or not. It's out there, flying through the volcanic peaks, hunting in the shadows, waiting. If this story got under your skin, hit that subscribe button because we dive deep into the world's most mysterious cryptids, unexplained phenomena, and legends that refuse to die. Drop a comment below and tell me, do you believe Batsquatch is real, or is this all just mass hysteria and misidentification? Have you ever had an encounter with something unexplained? Share your story. I read every single comment. Next week, we're investigating the Fresno night crawlers, those bizarre, stick-legged creatures caught on security cameras that have stumped experts for decades. You're not going to want to miss it. Until then, stay curious, stay skeptical, and stay safe out there. Because the world is far stranger than we've been led to believe. And sometimes, the monsters in the darkness are real.